Busch Gardens Williamsburg is Virginia's European theme park, situated just a 10-minute drive from central Williamsburg and a little less than an hour from downtown Richmond. The park takes up around 150 acres of land and welcomes in millions of guests every single year to experience the rides, see the shows, eat the food, and just enjoy the atmosphere. For over a decade now, Busch Gardens Williamsburg has been the consistent Golden Ticket Award winner for the most beautiful theme park in the world. And whether or not you agree with that, there's no denying that a special amount of detail is put into this park's horticulture department to create a very welcoming atmosphere. It's one of only a handful of regional theme parks in the US, as most tend to be amusement parks. Busch Gardens Williamsburg was truly designed as a themed experience with 10 of what they call hamlets. These are based around different regions of Europe, which consist of England, Italy, France, Germany, Ireland, and Scotland. And these themes have stayed consistent for the past several decades, but that being said, the property continues to evolve with the addition of new attractions, so the guests keep wanting to come back for more. Today, Busch Gardens Williamsburg has 11 roller coasters, 5 of which have been added just in the past 10 years. As Busch Gardens is operated by United Parks and Resorts, formerly known as SeaWorld Entertainment, they've opted for the strategy of a new investment every single year. That way, there's always a reason for people to come back, see what's new, and maybe even pick themselves up an annual pass. And that certainly was the case for me and my family, as I grew up just over an hour away from here. This was one of the first theme parks I ever visited, and I've experienced so many of their legacy attractions, like the original Big Bad Wolf, Curse of Dark Castle. I remember when they opened Mock Tower. I rejoiced when they closed Mock Tower. It's been crazy seeing all of their ups and downs, and in this review, I'm going to give you a comprehensive overview of the entire property, detailing each hamlet, the various attractions you might encounter, and give some tips along the way so that you'll know exactly what to expect when you go to visit. But first, a little backstory. The name Busch Gardens dates back to the 70s when Anheuser-Busch first developed the property. It was just one aspect of the company's investment into the Williamsburg area, which would also include a nearby resort and a massive brewery, which to this day you can still see from the top of Griffin. Back then, the park was known as Busch Gardens the Old Country and wouldn't receive the name Busch Gardens Williamsburg until 1993. With the park's position just off of Interstate 64, accessing the park is super easy, barely an inconvenience. And that's important considering their goal is to entice people to visit from all around Virginia, North Carolina, Maryland, and maybe even further, because Williamsburg is part of Virginia's historic triangle, alongside Jamestown and Yorktown. There's a lot of reasons to visit this area, and so what oftentimes happens is Busch Gardens Williamsburg is just one day in a family's larger vacation to this area, Virginia Beach, and Norfolk. And with Busch Gardens' emphasis on themed entertainment, there truly is something for everyone to do. You do not have to be into rides and roller coasters to enjoy this park. Now, Busch Gardens is still far from perfect, and I'm going to detail some of those downsides in this video, one of which you'll encounter long before you enter the front gate, and that is pricing. Busch Gardens is one of those parks that nickel and dimes you. If you don't have an annual pass that includes parking, be prepared to shell out. And I know that Busch Gardens is far from the only park that does this, but specifically within the United Parks chain, they've gone under a lot of fire for things like the 5% surcharge, which just gets tacked on to the end of any purchase you make in the park. And that's not even factoring in your day ticket. Busch Gardens uses tiered pricing based on demand. So if you buy online, on the low end, it'll probably cost you around $55 US, but on the high end, around $110. I highly encourage you to avoid those high demand ticket days. They're typically on weekends and at their worst around major holidays. Not only will it save you money, but your actual experience will be significantly better. And I'll go into more specifics later on, but Busch Gardens can be a real pain when it's slammed. That can begin as early as the line for parking tolls, which I've seen backed up all the way to the interstate. Fun fact, once I waited over an hour in line for tolls in the blazing heat that my car actually completely overheated and broke down, and there was nothing I could do because I was boxed in by cars all around me. So yeah, not great. If you are one of those people that waits to buy your ticket at the front gate though, there are at least plenty of ticket booths, so hopefully the line shouldn't be long and they do have kiosks up front that when they're working, in theory, it should be fast. So hopefully now that you've got your ticket in hand, you can begin your walk to the front entrance, which is going to be this narrow wooded path that slopes down towards a ravine. Busch Gardens is a terrain park through and through. you're going to be doing a lot of walking up and down. And as a result, this entry experience is a true reveal. You can't see much of the park until you get there. You'll scan in at this castle-looking front gate, walk on through, and boom, suddenly you are completely immersed in your first hamlet, England. This section is known as Banbury Cross, which is based on this old English look where you have a lot of the classic phone booths, that distinct stylized facade of all the buildings. It's a great first impression and really beautifully presented. You won't find any rides here, but there is a show up on the left-hand side. You have Shakespeare's Globe Theater, great for live entertainment, but also kind of a downside that it's at the front because this pathway is just a funnel. There's really not a whole lot of reason to go through here unless you're entering or exiting the park, which means if you do want to go see a show, you're inherently backtracking. The rest of the park is just a full circle. But I think it helps set the stage of what you're going to encounter throughout the park. I love the centerpiece of Big Ben. There's one restaurant on the far side called Squire's Grill. One of those places I would never usually eat at because I just wasn't a huge fan of the food served there, but they did just undergo a big renovation, so it might be better. I'm not sure. I'll have to check it out next time I visit. So from here, let's transition into the full loop around Busch Gardens. I'm going to be going in the counterclockwise direction, so we'll start things off with Scotland because that is directly ahead. This is probably the smallest hamlet that was given to one of the countries. I think it's really just so they could put in the Loch Ness Monster. This is easily the most iconic attraction in the park. It opened back in 1978, just 3 years after opening. It's an Aero custom looper, one of the best they ever made. It has those iconic interlocking loops that are positioned out over the Rhine River, and one of Busch Gardens' recent projects was giving this ride a huge overhaul, replacing entire track sections, installing new theming. This is the best Loch Ness has ever looked. One of those rides that you must do when you come here. Now, one of the other signature aspects of the Scotland area are some of their animals. While I wouldn't really consider Busch Gardens a wildlife park, they do have a select few species of animals that you might find scattered about. This includes Clydesdales, because it was starred by Anheuser after all. There's some fun sheep, adorable collies, and my personal favorite, Poppy the Highland cow. One of the neat things that Busch Gardens does is offer behind-the-scenes tours, and if you go on the right day, you can sign up for one of these experiences, some of which include up-close encounters with the different animals, and I did the one to meet Poppy the cow, got to feed her some food, and it was wonderful. For roller coaster fans, you can book an insider tour where you get to go in the maintenance bay for Loch Ness Monster, behind the scenes of Verbolten. Back in the day, you used to come in before park open and could ride up to the top of Griffin and walk around, though from my understanding, they no longer do that. Still a really cool option, though, if you want to learn about how they keep these rides up and running. Now, getting back to Scotland, right across from that Highland cow is one of 3 train stations in Busch Gardens Williamsburg. This is our first mode of public transportation that we'll discuss. If you want to board the train, your stations are in Scotland, Festa Italia, and New France. The stretch from Scotland to Festa Italia is pretty short. If you're not going to do the loop, I recommend riding it from Festa Italia to New France. You'll cover the most ground and also get some really cool vantage points as some of the park's roller coasters. I love the interactions with Big Bad Wolf and Invader. It is so fun. Keeping to the right, you'll walk downwards towards the ravine and cross over a bridge into Ireland. The big signature attraction here is Finnegan's Flyer, which made its debut in 2019. It was a much needed addition as Busch Gardens was severely lacking in the flat ride department, and this zone as a whole was one of those sections that you would just kind of walk through because you had to. There wasn't much to entice you to stay, and this S&S Scream and Swing is awesome. I love how on one side you shoot up and you're staring down towards the water, and then if you're facing the other direction, it feels like you're being launched off the platform. An excellent ride. I love these Scream and Swings, and I think the placement that Busch Gardens did here just makes this one of the best. Now to the right, we have one of the first eyesores of Busch Gardens Williamsburg, and that is an abandoned theater that has had quite the history. There is a motion simulator in there that most recently was home to Battle of Ire, which was a virtual reality attraction that only lasted I think 2 years. I first experienced that attraction as Europe in the Air, but I know many will remember it as Corkscrew Hill, and now it is nothing. With Busch Gardens Williamsburg being open year-round, indoor attractions are so important. The summers here get ridiculously hot and humid, and the winters can be pretty cold. They really need to come up with something to reinvigorate this space, and hopefully it'll come in the form of an attraction that'll be a bit more long-lasting. Luckily, there is an indoor show over to the left-hand side. It's called Celtic Fire. One of the fan favorites here at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. It's been running for decades at this point. If you're with a family member that's not big into the thrill rides, this is probably something that they'll want to prioritize. Other staples of this section include Grogan's Pub, a very intricately themed gift shop on the left-hand side. They sell some pretty interesting stuff from Irish culture. And then this classic Castle O'Sullivan look directly ahead. This zone is collectively known as Killarney, after the real one over in Ireland, and I do think it is one of the best looking sections at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. I just think they need a roller coaster over here. They have the room for it, maybe one day. Now, as you exit under the archway, you'll begin a long sloped walk down to the left-hand side past the remaining animals in Busch Gardens Williamsburg. This includes bald eagles, wolves, and up ahead, lorikeets. The lorikeet garden is an excellent place to surround yourself with birds. There's a good chance they might land on your shoulder. The wolves you won't be able to get as close to. They have 8 here at the moment. They're separated into 4 or 5 packs and even include some rescues. The puppies I got to see during my most recent visit were so cute. And if you time it right, you can actually learn more about them in one of the presentations that will take place in the park. If shows are important to you, be sure to also check the Busch Gardens app throughout the day. They'll keep you posted on the different times. Now, unfortunately, in this zone, we have yet another abandoned attraction. This one, a massive stage that used to be home to a show called Pet Shenanigans. I grew up watching this pet show. It was very cheesy, campy, but also adorable. And this theater has not been used in years. I've been wondering what their plans are for it, if they'll eventually find a new show to replace it, or maybe just rip it out, put something new in. Who knows? But I think they have other priorities at the moment. So my guess is this will probably sit here for a couple more years. But that does lead us into our next country, and that is France. This is essentially broken up into 2 halves, where the front half represents a French village and the back half is more inspired by the French influence in Canada, which I always thought was a strange choice. Like, it's Busch Gardens Europe. Why is there a Canada shop? Why am I trying to buy maple syrup here? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. We got several big attractions here, the most iconic of which is Griffon, a B&M dive coaster. This is only the second built in the United States, replacing an old driving car attraction called Le Mans. Still to this day, one of the largest dive coasters ever built, and one of the smoothest. Absolutely a fan favorite here at the park, even if it doesn't have much theming. Maybe one day we'll see some added. At the moment, it's just lightly stylized. The best you'll get is this giant Coca-Cola say ah thing on the ground. Very Six Flags of them, but also it's kind of funny, so I'll allow it. Right next to Griffon is also one of the stations for the Sky Ride. This is the other mode of transportation you can take around the park, with stops also in Germany and by Sesame Street. Each leg is very short, so you're really just there for the views, not necessarily because it's quicker than to just walk. If crowds are light, they'll let you stay on, but more often than not, that is not the case. If you keep walking towards the back of the zone, on the right-hand side, we have Trapper's Smokehouse, home to freshly made barbecue, lots of different meats. One of the better food locations in the park, but again, it is maybe on the more expensive side. But man, can it be tempting to eat there. They'll pump smells through the air. Sometimes when you're riding Griffon, you'll be like at the very top, hanging over that drop, and you can just smell the food from Trapper's Smokehouse. It's pretty funny. And right behind it, we have a small scrambler and our other big roller coaster, Invader. This is Busch Gardens Williamsburg's only wooden roller coaster. It is manufactured by GCI. It is family thrill. The ride opened back in 2017, and at the time, it was actually one of my favorites in the park, though I will admit, it has not aged as well as I would have liked. The ride opened the same year as Mystic Timbers over at Kings Island, and that ride is still running like a dream, and the same cannot be said for Invader. I think sooner or later, this attraction is going to be overdue for a nice, good retrack. And I think that will make it a more enjoyable experience. But as of right now, one of my favorite things about it is that iconic front entrance. I love the battering ram. It is so cool and a lot better now than when it first opened. Yikes, not one of their finest moments. And finally, our last attraction here is the park's log flume Les Scoot. Manufactured by Aerodynamics, this is another one of those rides that has been operating for a very long time, so when they actually installed Invader, they had to build it up and over Le Scoot, which is why you have some of those really cool interaction points. While most log flumes will stay very close to the ground, Le Scoot stays elevated. You're pretty high up. It's very unique, and I really enjoy the saw theming that they have right before the big drop. It's pretty cool. From Le Scoot, you'll continue down the wooded path and cross a bridge into our next land, Germany. This is a whole section based around Bavaria. Its official name is Rheinfeld. It can really be identified from these colorful buildings that you'll walk along this alleyway. Several years ago, they gave it a big refresh where the colors are a lot more vibrant now. It looks really nice. I love the look of these shops. They do wine tastings on one side. To the left is a very unique experience called Burgermeister's Hideaway. It's something different that we haven't really seen at a theme park before. It's essentially a speakeasy where you enter through a hidden door and then try out different drinks, alcoholic or non-alcoholic. And it's like story driven. It's pretty interesting. Maybe not something I'd be inclined to do again, but I'm certainly glad I tried it and I admire them for their creativity. And the big attraction here is Alpengeist, otherwise known as Ghost of the Alps. This is the world's tallest B&M inverted coaster, standing 195 feet in the air. This ride will whip you through 6 inversions, almost 4,000 feet of track. Pure speed, has some really whippy moments, maybe even to the point where they're considered jerky. Might not be for everyone. It's one of those attractions that has a big fan base, but if you're someone like myself, it's just kind of alright. I don't know, maybe I'm just numb to it by now, who knows. Only other attractions here include the Kinder Carousel and that other skyride station that connects to France. This leg would send you over past Loch Ness towards Sesame Street. And speaking of a kids area, Germany is also connected to a very small kids zone called Land of the Dragons. It's pretty much just a play structure. It's very old school. I played here when I was a kid, and they haven't changed a thing. I joked that this land walked so that Isle of Berk could run, but it's different enough it does technically count as its own hamlet. But lastly, before we move into Oktoberfest, I think it's important to acknowledge that if you're wanting to access the Germany section of the park from the front entrance, you don't have to walk all the way around in this big loop. There's a shortcut via a bridge across the Rhine River that allows you to access Germany from Scotland. It's a steep walk, you have to go down a lot of stairs, but that's where you get that iconic view of Loch Ness Monster, Alpengeist Cobra Roll, and also where you can do the Rhine River cruise. This is a short boat ride that'll take you down towards the helix area of Apollo's chariot. You don't get that close to it, but it is very scenic. The best views are arguably of Verbolten because you get right up next to its drop. Yet another leisurely transport attraction. Between this, the train, and the skyride, Busch Gardens has the big 3. That's a rarity. Some parks won't even have 1, let alone 2. So you gotta commend them for that. Now from here we transition into what feels like Germany Part 2, but it is technically a different hamlet, and that is because we are changing locations within Germany. Now we've made it to Oktoberfest. This is, of course, the world-famous festival that takes place in Munich every single year. German fairs are such a famous part of their history that Busch Gardens Williamsburg is embracing that idea. They've placed many colorful flat rides, including a set of swings, some bumper cars, and together this is actually one of the largest sections of the park, not just in land, but in quantity of attractions. There's actually 3 roller coasters here, and it used to be home to even more. Back in the day, Busch Gardens Williamsburg was home to a Schwarzkopf Wildcat. It closed in 1983, but actually still exists to this day just up the road in Maryland at Adventure Park USA. I got to ride it there, which was pretty cool. They also used to have a mock Wild Mouse, which some of you guys might be familiar with because after it closed in 2003, they sent it down to Busch Gardens Tampa, where it operated as Sand Serpent. The ride is no longer around as it closed in 2023 to make room for Phoenix Rising, but pretty cool that some of these classics just got moved around. The 3 coasters that are in this section today, though, are completely custom and likely aren't going anywhere. First up, on the right-hand side, we have Dark Coaster. This is located in the Dark Castle show building. This was put in place for the Curse of Dark Castle Dark Ride. We unfortunately said goodbye to that in 2017. It is still dearly missed. Honestly, one of my favorites in the park. It was so quotable. It used the Spider-Man style technology from Oceaneering to blend practical and screen effects. It was awesome. Dark Coaster is an appropriate replacement, and I did appreciate that they actually continued the theme that was established with Dark Castle, saying, yeah, we're still in King Ludwig's castle, but now you have to escape the storm. I love that Busch Gardens finally replaced that attraction. A family multi-launch coaster is a good fit here. I just wish they did a better job with theming on the inside, because it is kind of lackluster. Go check out our full separate review already up on the channel if you want to hear more about that ride, because I have plenty more thoughts. And the same can be said for the park's newest roller coaster, the Big Bad Wolf, The Wolf's Revenge. This is a new for 2025 attraction that sits on the plot of land that was occupied by Drachenfire. This was the one former attraction of Oktoberfest that did not get a relocation, and that's because the ride was kind of an epic fail, and that's why it's been given this like legendary status, where it's so cool if you got to ride it because it was only here for 6 years. It was manufactured by Aerodynamics and was built with a different support structure where they tried to mimic B&M's column system, and structurally it just ended up having all sorts of issues. They had to rip out one of the inversions because it was just too rough. The ride was not particularly liked. So that area sat vacant for a long time. It was the biggest plot of land at Busch Gardens, and there was a lot of discussion of what they would put there, but they ended up settling on a B&M family invert. Not my first choice, but that being said, they did an excellent job calling back to the original Big Bad Wolf. While the original Wolf was more dynamic, I think the theming and presentation of this one is way better. And frankly, it's some of the best theming I've seen this park do in years. So in that regard, I'm really happy with it. What they need to do next, though, is add some more attractions back there, because the big downside with Big Bad Wolf, The Wolf's Revenge, is it is pretty far removed from everything else. From the front entrance, this is the furthest attraction away. Quite a hike to get there. It'd be nice if they had some more back there to help flesh out that zone. Next to the entrance path for the Big Bad Wolf, though, is the iconic Fest House. This is the park's largest food venue, completely indoors, so perfect to escape the heat or the rain. Unfortunately, not my favorite when it comes to their menu. But at least one advantage to this space is they do have a stage there in the center, so if you time it right, you can actually see some live entertainment during your meal, which is pretty cool. So like I mentioned, at this point, you're pretty much in the furthest corner of the park from where you started. So now we're going to begin looping back around towards the front. And to do that, we have to walk past the plot of land where Mock Tower used to sit. It is now occupied by a stage that they can use for live music. Honestly, you would never know it was even there, and more often than not, I see a lot of people sitting in that space, so it makes me think that maybe they won't put something else there. If they want to ever build a new drop tower, I actually would say instead maybe put it by Big Bad Wolf or something. I don't mind this eating area because before, there weren't very many places to sit, and there's a food venue right there where you can get sandwiches, these really good pretzels, sometimes they have pizza on them, it's a pizza pretzel, it's pretty good. Overpriced, but so is everything in this park. And lastly, that brings us to Verbolten, our last big attraction of Oktoberfest. And depending on who you ask, some would argue this is the best ride in the park. And I get it, it's an indoor-outdoor family thrill coaster, the best themed ride around. In this story, you're with a German tour company that is taking you through the Black Forest. There's a well-done queue, tons of details in the dual loading platform, 3 different settings in the show building, and that helps make it re-rideable so you can try to get the different settings. They're not drastically different, but it's still cool, and Verbolten has a fun surprise in that building that gets everyone every time. And maybe one of the best parts about it is that most of this layout is hidden from view. All you can really see is this iconic drop from the bridge, following the exact same path that the Big Bad Wolf had, literally reused footers. So for most riders, the layout for this attraction is a total surprise. So let's take a walk across the Rhine and enter our next country, Italy. This is another 2-parter hamlet with San Marco coming up first, and then later on we'll get to Festa Italia. This is maybe the prettiest section of Busch Gardens Williamsburg. The architectural style that they went with here is pretty spot on. We have a massive dining venue called Marco Polo's Marketplace. This is the most variety in the park, and for that reason, this is usually my go-to. You can get pizza, pasta, Asian food, sandwiches, whatever you're interested in. And there's a covered theater space where you can enjoy your meal. And again, if you time it right, there'll be live performers out on stage. So if you haven't noticed, entertainment is a big part of Busch Gardens, and it is a significant help to the atmosphere. I think the big downside is, one, it's not consistent. I mean, naturally, if you go on a busier day, they're probably going to have a lot more people out. And then on the flip side, if you go on a quiet day and there's not very many offerings, it changes the vibe. So kind of a catch-22 when they do that. But I feel like they've really embraced the Italian stereotypes with this zone. I mean, they got the gelato. They're literally selling pasta like in the gift shops, because why not? We got lots of columns that are set up like ruins and some pretty gardens that unfortunately have seen better days. This section of Italy was known as Da Vinci's Garden. The idea was that you have all these different attractions around that are like Da Vinci's creations, and we've since seen 2 of them close, with the flying machine and Da Vinci's cradle, and those pads are just sitting empty. Luckily, we still have the battering ram and the little balloons, but I think this zone needs to be the next to get a makeover. And actually, it sounds like that might not be too far away. There's rumors that they might be adding a set of antique cars back here, which is kind of like a revitalization of Le Mans. And if they do that, I hope that we see new flat rides where those old ones were. I think a Zamperla Nebulas in this section would look so good. The kinetic energy matching with the aesthetic, totally embracing the idea of Da Vinci's inventions. And there's technically one more attraction in this area, but it's actually towards the start, bumping up near the Sesame Street area. So first, let's pivot into Festa Italia. And this zone is stacked. It's kind of like Oktoberfest in the way that the idea is that you're embracing a festival, but this time it's within Italy. So we have midway games, some colorful flat rides like teacups, and 3 big roller coasters. Apollo's Chariot is the original B&M hypercoaster opening back in 1999. It's an out and back running parallel to that road that you took to get into the toll plaza, so therefore it's probably the first attraction you'll see when you pull up to the park. It certainly has its fans, but for me, I think the ride is extremely lackluster and probably my least favorite B&M hypercoaster. The airtime is very mild, just doesn't stack up to more modern B&M hypercoasters. I've had some cycles on it where it felt like I didn't even need a restraint. It was that tame. But that being said, I like the last drop because it's a surprise, and night rides are good because it's so far removed from the rest of the park, there's no lights back there. So that's a nice experience. Next door is Tempesto. This is a Premier Ride Skyrocket 2. I love the entrance and look of this in the park. I know it was a little divisive back when it opened. Some people felt like it ruined the skyline. I think it adds to the skyline. It's a short, forceful experience that I would probably do more often if they just got rid of the dang comfort collars. These are not necessary to the ride's safety system. It literally is just there for comfort, but it really just makes it more uncomfortable and slows down the operations. If their whole thing is they were afraid people were going to be scared from going upside down with just a lap bar, then why does Pantheon next door have a 0G stall with just a lap bar? Yeah, exactly. I think if you ask most enthusiasts, they'll tell you that Pantheon is the best roller coaster at Busch Gardens. It's an Intamin multi-launch coaster featuring a swing launch, a huge spike, top hat, and a couple inversions. It's a good experience that would be a lot better if the presentation didn't look like crap. Sorry if that sounded harsh, but also not sorry, because Busch Gardens has set a pretty high standard of theming with the rest of the park. As you've been watching this review, hopefully you've seen what they're capable of, and Pantheon just does not match the aesthetic. You can see how much it was budget cut, and it looks bad. The Loch Ness redo was so good. I loved what they did adding all the theming, and I genuinely think doing the same for Pantheon would go a long way. And our last ride for Festa Italia is Roman Rapids. Busch Gardens has 3 core water rides. I mentioned La Scoot. This is number 2. The ride threads through the trees, even going underneath Apollo's Chariot, making for some cool views. The rapids themselves are pretty tame. You likely won't get very wet from that, but there are some waterfalls at the end, and really that's what will get you. Far from my favorite rapids I've experienced, but not bad. I'm much more likely to experience the other big water ride in Italy. This is Escape from Pompeii, an Intamin shoot the chutes with a huge indoor dark ride section where literally Pompeii is falling apart all around you. It is visually impressive. And then the ending is just so nothing. The ride is missing a final scene, or at least needs some music. It just kind of ends. It's very anticlimactic and feels a little unfinished. But that being said, at least from the outside, it looks fantastic. The unfortunate reality, though, is that this is one of those attractions that can suffer from a lot of downtime. I've seen it go long periods of time where it remains shut. And so for that reason, if I had to predict what would be the next major attraction to just close altogether, it wouldn't shock me if it was Escape from Pompeii. I hope it's not, though. I think it's too iconic to close, in my opinion. I think it would purely depend if the maintenance costs began to outweigh the benefits. And finally, that brings us to our last hamlet, which is Sesame Street Forest of Fun. This is the biggest kids area in the park. On the left, that's where you would access that final Skyride station. But every other attraction here is for a younger demographic. Plenty of places for the kids to play, and they do have the last roller coaster here, and that is Grover's Alpine Express, a little Zero Kids coaster. Good fun, and like that, we have completed the loop. As you can see here, there is a lot to love. The park is beautiful. Is it the world's most beautiful theme park? In my opinion, no. But Busch Gardens certainly thinks so, and they will advertise it everywhere. I think their landscaping is excellent. Their theming, aside from Big Bad Wolf, just isn't what it used to be. I can think of several European parks that I think do it better though, but I will commend them. I love how many huge trees there are in Busch Gardens, which means a lot of natural shade. On those hot days, that is crucial. These pathways aren't big, wide midways, which means you aren't exposed to the sun like you would be at other locations. The downside to that, though, is if you come to Busch Gardens on a busy day, this park bottlenecks really bad. You might be shoulder to shoulder at times. It can be a frustrating experience. Like, don't get me wrong, they do crowd management better than some other parks I've seen, but when it's bad, it's bad. You won't find a coaster less than a 45-minute wait, pretty much forcing you to buy quick queue. They did recently add single rider lines to Apollo's Chariot, Alpengeist, and Griffin, which is at least nice. It might not save you time, but it could. I think a lot of it depends on their operations, and frankly, that can vary. My most recent visits, they've been pretty solid. On quieter days, obviously they won't run as many trains on like Griffin or Verbolten. Verbolten will typically only have one station open. It's like a staffing thing. I think a good indicator if the park is slammed is if Verbolten is on 2 stations, but that doesn't necessarily mean strong operations. Stacking is a very real issue. Verbolten can run up to 5 trains with 2 loading platforms, but they rarely ever do that. I've seen 5+ minute dispatches on some rides before, like Pantheon. Some operators just won't have that sense of urgency, and it can be a repeat pattern, which as a guest is frustrating. But there's also the flip side to that. I've seen plenty of ride operators who are very dedicated and are pumping out trains. It really is a hit or miss, but if lines really are that bad when you go, at least with my pass, I know that I get a one-time skip the line that I can use on any attraction of my choosing, which is a very nice benefit. Another important policy that I think is worth noting, Busch Gardens is a locker park, meaning if you come here with a bag, you will have to store your items in a locker at the front of each ride. You can't bring it in the line with you. On Pantheon, you have to empty your pockets completely. They do have these little tiny bins on the other side of the platform, so if you want to put your phone or wallet over there, you can. But other rides, you can just ride with your things. Just make sure they're secure. So to wrap this up, Busch Gardens is a place that I have a lot of fond memories at. I love experiencing this park with family members who've never been before or friends who are visiting from all over the world. But in the same way, it is fun to visit with those people. I find that Busch Gardens isn't one of those parks that I necessarily seek out as a preference, at least in comparison to other properties. Maybe I'm in the minority, maybe it's just because I'm used to it, but Busch Gardens is one of those places that maybe doesn't excite me like other parks do. At least between the Virginia theme parks, I've always been more of a fan of King's Dominion. Even though it's an amusement park, in many ways it's just as nice. I think they have the best 2 roller coasters in the whole state, and I actually like the food better there too. But I completely understand if people prefer Busch Gardens. They're different experiences, places that people wouldn't compare if they weren't only an hour away from each other. But I also think my diminished desire to visit Busch Gardens isn't specific to just this property. I also have similar feelings towards the other parks in the chain, like Busch Gardens Tampa or SeaWorld Orlando. My drive to go there isn't as high as other parks in the region. I think one of the main things that keeps me coming back is the fact that they invest in the park so often. And as a pass holder, that is one of my favorite things about it. I love that the managers are invested in the park and making it better, or at least trying to make it better. Maybe not everything is successful or a huge hit, but it shows they care. I can think of a lot of regional parks that haven't received new investment in over a decade. And to those locals, I really feel bad for. At Busch Gardens, there's always something new to see. And while we have had to say goodbye to some pretty awesome things, I think overall, the park is trending in the positive direction. I think their next steps, as I mentioned, updating Italy, finding a new attraction where Battle of Ire was, more rides backed by Big Bad Wolf, and eventually, I would love to see an on-site hotel. It seems like a big missed opportunity for a destination park like this. Most of the hotels in the region are in downtown Williamsburg, and I know that it's not a long drive, but I feel like it would be a great incentive for people to stay where they could either walk to the park or take a hotel shuttle to the front entrance. And if there's a way to do it, I think they should. But I want to hear from you guys down in the comments below. What do you think of Busch Gardens Williamsburg? Do you agree with all the points that I brought up? If you think there's anything I missed, please post it down in the comments below. If you're new to the channel, please go check out the Park Reviews playlist. I've reviewed places from all around the world, and they're all organized in alphabetical order by their name. Go see if one of your favorites is on there. And of course, make sure to stay tuned for more here at Coaster Studios, and I'll see you next time.